The essence of inflation, the invisible force eroding money's value. Imagine holding a $100 bill, believing its value remains the same forever. But in reality, the purchasing power of money silently erodes over time. Inflation is like a quiet, persistent tide pulling away the worth of every dollar. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply happens. Quietly, consistently, powerfully. The money in your wallet today will buy you less tomorrow. Not because something changed in you, but because the economic environment has shifted. Understanding this force is the first step toward taking control, instead of being blindsided by it. Let's rewind time. In the year 2000, a burger cost just $2. Today, you might pay $6 for the exact same meal. Not because it's tastier or larger, but because the dollar has weakened. The true value of money isn't printed on paper, it's in what that money can buy. This purchasing power is the real currency we live by, and it's being drained away silently through inflation. And unless you're aware of this, you may think you're standing still, when in fact, you're slowly falling behind. Inflation refers to the rise in prices over time, which causes every dollar to lose its purchasing power. It's like a rising tide swallowing the strength of your financial position. That's why saving passively is no longer a safe option. It can become a financial trap for the unaware. The longer your money sleeps, the weaker it becomes. And in a world where time is money, watching your cash lose value while sitting idle can cost more than you think. And let's be clear, inflation isn't caused by greedy sellers conspiring to raise prices. It's the result of complex dynamics, production shifts, consumer behavior, monetary policies, and social expectations. Once you grasp this truth, you stop fearing inflation and start learning to navigate it. You begin seeing opportunities in the chaos. Understanding inflation is not about economics, it's about financial survival. The four engines of inflation: demand, costs, money, and expectation. Inflation doesn't just happen, it's driven by several key forces, 4 to be exact. Think of them as gears turning within a massive financial engine. Each gear contributes to the rising price levels we experience daily. By understanding these drivers, you gain power. You stop being reactive and start becoming proactive, planning better, investing smarter, and staying ahead of inflation rather than being dragged by it. This is the mindset that separates those who survive financially from those who thrive. The first, demand pull inflation. Imagine a bakery has 10 loaves of bread and 20 eager buyers. People start bidding higher to get one. Price rises. This is demand pull inflation. When consumer demand exceeds supply, prices rise. Whether from increased incomes, population growth, or government stimulus, when people have more money to spend than the economy can supply, inflation ignites. It's the classic tug-of-war between too many dollars and too few goods. Demand doesn't just come from people, it often comes from governments too. When stimulus checks go out or taxes are cut, the entire population may increase spending at once. If supply chains can't keep up, inflation surges. The economy overheats like an engine running too fast. Without strategic production increases, that extra demand pulls prices upward, fast. The second, cost push inflation picture, yourself running a coffee shop. Suddenly, coffee beans double in price due to a bad harvest. Rent goes up, utility bills rise. To survive, you must raise your prices. That's cost push inflation, when input costs increase and businesses pass the burden to consumers. Customers pay more not because of increased demand, but because producing the same product just costs more. This kind of inflation is often triggered by supply shocks, wars, natural disasters, fuel shortages. In a global economy, disruption in one region affects prices everywhere. If crude oil spikes in the Middle East, transportation and food costs rise globally. When production costs climb, everything else follows suit. It's inflation from the supply side, and it can happen fast. The next, built-in inflation. As prices rise, workers demand higher wages to maintain their standard of living. Businesses raise salaries to retain employees, but then raise prices to protect profits. This cycle repeats. Prices rise, wages rise, prices rise. This is built-in inflation. It becomes ingrained in the system, not due to shocks or spikes, but through expectations. When people expect inflation, their behaviors reinforce it. This is one of the trickiest types to manage because it's psychological. When people assume inflation is inevitable, they buy early, hoard goods, and demand more pay. These actions feed inflation like adding wood to a fire. What starts as fear becomes reality. Managing inflation expectations is just as important as managing the actual numbers. Finally, monetary inflation. Even without demand or cost pressures, printing too much money can trigger inflation. When governments inject excessive cash into the economy, the value of each dollar declines. People have more money, but goods haven't increased, so prices rise. It's simple math. The more currency in circulation, the less each unit is worth. History is full of devastating examples. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, post-war Germany, places where governments printed money recklessly, and inflation spiraled out of control. In these cases, money became worthless. Understanding this is crucial. Money isn't value. It's just a medium of exchange. When it's overproduced, the illusion collapses, and everyone pays the price. History is full of devastating examples. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, post-war Germany, places where governments printed money recklessly, and inflation spiraled out of control. In these cases, money became worthless. Understanding this is crucial. Money isn't value. It's just a medium of exchange. When it's overproduced, the illusion collapses, and everyone pays the price. The CPI is limited by design. It reflects general price movements, but doesn't always match what people actually feel. For example, if essentials like milk, bread, and eggs rise rapidly, but luxury items like TVs or scented candles stay the same, the overall CPI might still show only mild inflation. Yet for most people, especially those on tight budgets, the pain is very real. This is the disconnect between statistical inflation and personal experience. Just because the official number seems low doesn't mean your cost of living hasn't shot through the roof. Imagine you spend 80% of your income on rent, groceries, gas, and utilities, basic survival needs. But the CPI includes dozens of items you rarely or never buy. So even if the CPI goes up only 3%, your personal expenses might rise 10% or more. This highlights a major gap between measured inflation and lived inflation. The average figure hides crucial details. For working-class individuals and families, inflation feels sharper, deeper, and far more urgent than the charts and graphs suggest. That's why smart investors, policymakers, and everyday citizens must look beyond the headline CPI. They analyze price changes by category, spot trends in essential goods, and monitor changes in energy or housing. In a volatile world, success doesn't belong to those who just earn more. It belongs to those who understand true value. Knowing how inflation is measured is important. But knowing how it affects you personally, that's what separates the financially aware from the financially vulnerable. Inflation, a destroyer or a hidden friend? When most people hear the word inflation, they react with fear. But here's the truth. Inflation isn't always bad. In small, manageable doses, it's the lifeblood of a growing economy. That's why central banks around the world aim for 2 to 3% annual inflation, a sweet spot where things grow without overheating. Think of inflation as a fire. Controlled, it warms and fuels. Uncontrolled, it burns everything down. Understanding the different temperatures of inflation is crucial, because in reality, it's not inflation itself that hurts us, but our failure to manage and respond to it effectively. Mild inflation encourages spending. When people know prices will rise gradually, they're more likely to buy today instead of waiting. That means businesses grow, jobs are created, and economies thrive. It's a natural incentive that keeps money moving, innovation flowing, and progress marching forward. On the flip side, if inflation were zero or negative, people would hoard cash, delay spending, and choke the economy. So yes, a little inflation can be a good thing, as long as it's predictable, stable, and not left unchecked. But what happens when inflation goes negative? This is known as deflation, and it's a silent killer. Falling prices might sound like a win, but they cause businesses to earn less, cut wages, and lay off workers. Consumers delay spending, waiting for even lower prices. The economy grinds to a halt. This vicious cycle is exactly what triggered the Great Depression in the 1930s. It wasn't inflation that broke the system, it was the complete collapse in consumer confidence and spending power. Deflation paralyzes an economy far faster than moderate inflation ever could. Then there's the other extreme, hyperinflation, when prices rise more than 50% every month. In this nightmare scenario, money loses its meaning. You could carry a bag of cash and still not afford a loaf of bread. We've seen this in Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and post-WW1 Germany. People burned cash for warmth because it was worth less than firewood. When inflation spins out of control, the trust in currency disappears. And once that trust is broken, rebuilding it can take decades or longer. So the real question isn't, is inflation bad, but how much is too much or too little? The goal isn't to eliminate inflation, but to master it, to channel it. Like a skilled sailor navigating rough waters, we need to ride the wave, not drown in it. Inflation is not a villain or a savior, it's a force, a tool. And when you understand how it works, you stop being afraid and start making it work for you. Controlling inflation, the art of economic balance. If inflation is a fire always burning beneath the economy, then central banks and governments are its firefighters. Their job isn't to extinguish it, but to keep it warm, stable, and productive. Controlling inflation is an art of balance between fueling growth and avoiding financial chaos. Two main tools are used to strike this balance: monetary policy and fiscal policy. These are not just economic terms. They are levers of power that determine how your money works, how much it's worth, and what you'll be able to afford tomorrow. Understanding how they function puts you back in control. Monetary policy, the central bank's lever. When inflation runs hot, central banks step in. Their first tool? Interest rates. Raising interest rates makes borrowing money more expensive, reducing consumer and business spending. Lowering rates has the opposite effect, encouraging borrowing and stimulating the economy. Like a thermostat, rates must be adjusted carefully. One wrong move and the system overheats or freezes. Timing is everything. Central banks constantly monitor economic signals, GDP growth, employment rates, and price indices to decide whether to raise, lower, or hold interest rates steady. It's not just economics, it's precision engineering. But monetary policy doesn't stop there. Central banks also conduct what's called open market operations, OMO, buying or selling government bonds to control the money supply. When they buy bonds from commercial banks, they inject money into the system. When they sell bonds, they withdraw cash from circulation. This process directly influences how much money is floating in the economy. Too much money fuels inflation. Too little can stifle growth. With OMO, central banks can fine-tune liquidity without making headline changes. It's a subtle but powerful way to guide economic currents. Fiscal policy, the government's hand. While central banks control the money, governments control the taxes and spending. This is fiscal policy. To fight inflation, governments may raise taxes, reducing consumer disposable income and cooling down demand. It's not popular, but it works. On the flip side, if the economy slows down, they might cut taxes to boost consumer spending and kickstart growth. Fiscal policy affects people directly and immediately, which makes it both powerful and politically sensitive. Every tax reform or stimulus bill is a piece of the inflation puzzle. Another major weapon in fiscal policy is government spending. When governments invest in infrastructure, bridges, roads, hospitals, they inject cash into the economy, create jobs, and stimulate demand. But if overspending continues without checks, it overheats the economy and fuels inflation. Imagine the government is a giant customer, placing massive orders with businesses. This boosts income, but also drives up prices. That's why spending must be strategic, not just generous. Great fiscal policy is like chess. Every move must consider the long-term chain reaction. Coordination is key. Here's the truth. Neither monetary nor fiscal policy can fight inflation alone. The real power lies in coordination. When central banks and governments work in sync, adjusting interest rates, taxes, and spending in harmony, economies thrive. When they act at odds, confusion reigns, markets panic, and citizens pay the price. Inflation can't be eliminated, but it can be managed. It can be directed like a river, not stopped like a flood. And when it flows under control, it brings prosperity. That's the goal. Not zero inflation, but a climate of confidence where individuals and businesses can plan, invest, and grow with clarity. How to protect your money from inflation. While governments and central banks fight inflation on a macro level, at the personal level, it's your responsibility to protect your wealth. If you don't, everything you've worked for, your savings, your purchasing power, will slowly dissolve. $1,000 today might only buy what $700 did a decade ago. That's the hidden cost of doing nothing. If your savings grow slower than inflation, you're losing money even when your balance rises. The solution isn't to panic, it's to plan. Inflation is not just an economic event, it's a financial test. And the only passing grade comes from taking intentional action. The answer lies in smart investing. Your money must grow faster than prices. That means moving beyond low-interest savings accounts into assets that rise in value. Gold is a classic hedge. It retains worth through scarcity and demand. Stocks offer higher returns over time despite volatility. Real estate, inflation-protected bonds, index funds, and even cryptocurrencies can all play a role. There's no one-size-fits-all. The right mix depends on your goals, timeline, and risk tolerance. But doing nothing is the only guaranteed way to fall behind. You must choose to make your money work for you, or let inflation quietly work against you. You don't need to be a finance expert to get started. You only need to understand the golden rule. Never let your money sit idle. Start small, be consistent, and most importantly, keep learning. Invest in knowledge before investing in assets. Know what you own and why. Don't follow trends blindly. Don't throw your savings into things you barely understand. Financial growth starts with awareness. Every dollar should have a purpose, and every decision should bring you one step closer to financial freedom, not further into the shadows of uncertainty. So in conclusion, inflation is a constant, an invisible force testing your financial awareness every day. You can't eliminate it, but you can outsmart it. Those who stay still lose. Those who learn, plan, and invest rise above it. Inflation quietly drains wealth from the unprepared, but fuels the growth of those who act. This isn't just about saving money, it's about protecting your future. It's not about fear, it's about strategy. Start small, stay consistent, keep learning. Inflation will always be there, but you decide, will it pull you down or push you forward? Understand the game, play it wisely, and you'll transform inflation from a silent enemy into your greatest financial teacher.